Hello, everyone. I'm Rod Griffin. I'm Senior Director of Consumer Education and Advocacy for Experian. Welcome to Credit Chat Live. Joining me today is Larry Sprung. Larry's a financial advisor and author who's known for his work on personal finance and the emotional aspects of money management. We'll talk a lot about emotion and money today, I'm sure. His approach emphasizes the importance of aligning financial decisions with personal values and goals to create a more fulfilling and joyful life. And I think joyful is a great word to think about today. Larry's also a frequent participant and panelist on Experian's Credit Chat on X every Wednesday. So always value your advice. Larry, thanks for joining me today and being part of the chat.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me, Rod. And it's a pleasure to be a part of the Credit Chat community. So thanks for having me.
So we'll jump right in. Is there anything you want to share before I start asking questions, before we start a conversation? Because that's what I love to do, is just talk and really get views and understand where you're coming from. I think thinking about joy and money is a difficult connection for a lot of people to make.
Yeah, and I think that most advisors, most folks in our profession, probably make it even more difficult to have those conversations because there's such a focus on the numbers and the finances and how you should be doing things and why you should be doing things that may not be in line with what the family or what their why is. And I think, one of the reasons that we find that having this joyful focus is so important is because everybody has a different understanding or different goal for why they're accumulating money, why they want to retire. And most of that is surrounded by some joyful things that they would like to fill their time and spend their money on. So that's where we get to the root of really what the family is looking to accomplish with the money. And then we start working backwards and figuring out, well, okay, based upon these joyful events that you want to experience, how do we create the income or the assets to support that?
So you touch on a couple of things there. I think the question of what's your why is always interesting to me, and I'm hearing it more often. I actually asked with my team and some other folks in a call the other day, and that question came up, and we struggled in some ways to answer that question. And I think it plays such an important role in direction in your life and what brings you joy. So here's my first question coming out of what you said is, how did you come to the philosophy of joy and money and how we get there? What was there an epiphany, a moment in your life, or was it something that just sort of evolved for you?
So, I mean, it's a great question, and I think it all stemmed out of it started first as a marketing phrase in terms of we created this phrase of what did you do today that brought you joy, and the genesis of that question, if you will, really came out of the starting of my podcast, The Mitlin Money Mindset, and my wife Denise, who many people know is our director of marketing, and when we were releasing or preparing for the podcast, she said, you need one question. You need one question that you ask each of your guests to kind of tie everything back and really get an engagement from the guest on a personal level. And to her credit, she came up with the question, what did you do today that brought you joy? And ultimately, we ended up putting this question on T-shirts and various items. And I would go through airports, and I still do, with that question on my shirt, and I get stopped. People take pictures of it.
Sure.
One story I tell very often was I was online at Disney World, and a cast member broke character and looked me in the eye and said, "I ate a bag of Hershey Kisses today." And I didn't realize I was wearing the shirt, Rod. So I was looking at her strange. I look back at my family, my wife and kids, and I'm like, what the heck is she talking about? And then my kids were like, hey, dope, look at your shirt. And I was like, oh,
Yeah.
and it hit me. And it's become this thing that we leaned into. And as we started exploring, it started with the podcast, but as we started exploring it, and then I wrote my book, Financial Planning Made Personal, we started realizing that a lot of the conversations we have with families, already, we didn't use the term joy, but we were very inquisitive about why they were, accumulating money, why they wanted to retire, what were they going to do with all this new time. And it all started coming back to this common theme of joy. And basically, we just leaned into it, and it's become a really powerful tool, a powerful word. And now I've gotten this moniker as the joy guy, which I guess there are worse things to be called in this world. So
Yeah,
I'll
far
take
worse.
it willingly.
I've been called far worse. I know, by people in my own family sometimes. It's like, what are you doing? So,
Yeah.
not really. So, and my family brings me joy every day. So
All right.
that's
Even with the ribbing.
even with the ribbing, yeah.
Yeah.
Somebody has to be that, give them
Of
something to do.
course. Of
So
course.
so, and you mentioned other words. A lot of words come out of this conversation. Being mindful is something that you just mentioned too. So how do we think about how we focus on joy in our lives and tying that to purpose and money? So the why, what's our why? How does it bring us joy? How do we be mindful about our investments, our future, and our current as present as well, I guess, um, to achieve those things?
Yeah, so I think first and foremost, you have to have some kind of understanding of what that why is for you or your family, or whomever you're responsible for. And like you were saying with your team, it's not something that if you haven't thought about it and put some work into, that you could probably answer on the spot. If you put the work in, you might be able to. And I would also argue that even if you have put the work in and have an understanding of what your why is, what your why is today very well and probably will change in 5 years from now or 10 years from now. Life's shift and change. So you have to continually, have that introspection about what your why is, and then work to align other areas of your financial life around that. And one of the conversations that we have with families, right? We all, regular financial advisors talk very often about budgeting, right? And budgeting is important. It is definitely key. But at the same time, I find a lot of advisors do what I call budget shaming, which means like they'll say, oh, well, you're spending too much money here or you're spending too much money there. And, in some of those areas, it may very well be the case. But what happens if in the area you're concentrating on where you think they should be cutting, they derive a great deal of joy? So we take a different approach and say, when you're putting this budget together, look at those areas that you're spending in, and see, are those areas bringing you joy? If they are, keep them there at first. If they're not, get rid of them. And then you evaluate those areas that you're spending that are bringing you joy and seeing if those are in line with your budget. And if they are, and those bring you joy, then maintain it. We've all heard the conversation about, well, you're buying that big name, big brand coffee every day, and if you took that money instead of spending on the coffee and put it in a Roth IRA, you'd have tens of thousands of more dollars in or for retirement. But what I think gets lost in that example is, if you derive a great deal of joy from that cup of coffee, why, and you've budgeted for it, why not spend it, enjoy it, right? Look at other areas that you might be spending, because I'm sure there are other areas that you could cut out. So it's just a matter of being mindful of what your why is, why you're spending things and spending money, and what are you deriving from them. And then as you get to those bigger questions, in terms of, well, is retirement for me? We talk in generalities, like everybody needs to retire, everybody should be thinking about retirement, and that's not for everyone. I don't believe in it. I think it's an old construct. I will probably never retire. And what we don't have are those conversations about, well, what are you going to do with those 40, 50, 60 hours a week? And then you help guide these families to retire, and then they're miserable. So I think that we have to do a better job of having these conversations around what brings them joy so we can help them better plan for the most joyful life that they could, live.
Yeah, yeah, and I think that's thinking about retirement. We're kind of at that stage in life where I'm supposed to be thinking a lot about it, and I am, and trying to figure out what that means. So it's a long ways away, if ever, but it's still that. How do you define it? I think that's always interesting. Um, do you have any tips for finding your why? How do we do that?
Yeah, I think what you have to do is really sit down and outline what is most important to you. What are the things, the values, what are most important to you? For me, top of that list is family, right? I'll give you a perfect example for me, and maybe this resonates with some of the listeners, right? When my kids were very young, they were first born, I used to take off Fridays in the month of June, and it was really just to spend that day and that time with them, really present and enjoy. And I ended up expanding that from June to July, and then eventually June, July, and August. So every Friday in the summer, I would take off and spend, because my family was paramount to me, very important, and they still are today. But we still have families that call in during the summer on a Friday and still think to this day that I'm out of the office. My kids are now 18 and 21. They're, if I'm lucky, they're around on a Friday, let alone spending the whole day with me. But I don't do that anymore. But the point is, that was my why at the time. My family was number one, and that's what I wanted to do. Now, fast forward to today, my family's still top of that list. And if I have an event that I need to go attend for one of my boys or my wife, and somebody wants to meet for an appointment, it's probably not going to happen if it's at the same time. We're going to have to find a different time. So it's a matter of finding those things that you kind of filter your decision making process through. And one of those things, my definition of family has expanded over the years as my firm has grown. Right, we have a core value here that is client equals family equals team. So we consider our clients family, we consider our stakeholders, the people who work here, family. So that's like the overriding factor. If there's something going on with our family, that takes precedent. So the point is, you have to sit down, figure out what is most important to you, what are those values, and then it doesn't end with just figuring that out. You then have to utilize those values and your why as a filtering mechanism to make decisions in your life. Is this putting me closer to my why or further away? If it's putting you further away, then it's probably a no to whatever the ask is or whatever the opportunity is. If it's putting you closer, then it's most likely a yes, and just figuring out a time and when to do that.
So you're thinking about why, and I think it's kind of revolves too around what you're saying is it's like money. It the need changes, life changes. You have to be flexible, and what brings you joy changes from day to day, often hour to hour. Certainly year to year. I'm kind of the same way. My kids are grown, grandkids in college, and every day and the things that you do and the way you engage changes. So it can be challenging to be flexible. You also touch on and think about investing and when it starts. And I think about when my wife and I reached a point where we started years ago talking to a financial advisor. And we would have these very serious conversations that would go something like, I want to I want to start investing, and I want to talk to somebody about how we do that. And she would say, they're going to make us not spend any money.
Mhm.
I was like, I don't think that's true. So there was a mindset shift that we had to go through. And when we finally did, we found out it was exactly not true, that what it does is help us actually spend more in some cases,
Mhm.
and be better positioned for the future, and use our money more wisely. Um, and I think so that goes back to how do you start the conversation about money and tie it to joy? I mean, because I think with my wife and and I've talked to people, I tell them our money conversations usually don't start by talking about money. They start by
Mhm.
talking about other things,
Right.
and then we get to the money part.
Mhm.
how do you advise people to kind of separate that emotional part of money so that you can focus on your why and on being more joyful about life, I guess, in some ways, and not letting money distract from that?
Yeah. So first and foremost, I would have to say you have probably a very good advisor if they didn't, try to convince your wife, being that that was her fear of not spending. Because I will say that that's not something that happens all the time. I feel like there are a lot of advisors out there that are very mindful of your, meaning the client or family's money, and telling them not to necessarily spend it, right? Because it happens to be better for them than maybe it is for you. So sounds like you have a great advisor. But going back to your question, it's a challenge because to some degree, because sometimes it's a whole different paradigm for a lot of the families that we meet with, because they're like, wait a minute, we're not talking about how much I need to accumulate now by the age of 65 or whatever the age is. And I'm like, no, no, that'll come. That to us is table stakes. That's something that has to be spoken about. But the reality is, how we get there and how much is actually needed could vary very widely depending upon what your why is, how you're defining or looking for joy. So we help them try to craft a picture of what they believe their future life situation, circumstances are going to be in the future in a joyful way, and then help craft the financial aspect of their lives to help support that. And, it's not something that is easy. It's something that, as you said, is very fluid and will change over time, because especially the younger you are, the more opportunity there's going to be for significant change along the way. But I think what we're seeing today is a little bit different mindset than your generation, perhaps even mine, and maybe even settling in at my kids level today. I just spoke with an individual who left his job back in July, fairly young in the workforce, left his job in July, bought an RV, and decided for 5 months he was going to basically tour around. Went up north Canada, Vancouver area, and then came down the West Coast. And he said to me, I said, how long are you going for? He's like, we're going to wrap up in another month. It's going to be about 5 months. And he said, the reality is, I don't want to have to wait till I retire. I don't want to have to wait till I'm older when I may not be able to do this. I would rather do this when I can. Now, that derives, and is in line with his why and how he derives joy. And I'm not saying everybody should take off 5 months and, leave their job and do that. But that's his story, right? And what we try to do is kind of work with the family and craft their story, and then craft that joy around it with them. And sometimes we have situations where people are like, wow, nobody's ever asked me this. I have no clue. Can I have a couple weeks and we revisit this and have a conversation, because I want to put some thought into it? And other people, right off the bat, given permission to kind of share those experiences or their desires, start rattling things off that they're excited about, that they're really interested in doing, that brings a lot of joy to their life. And the fact that we know that up front makes it a lot easier for us to help them plan from a financial aspect. And it also puts us in a position where we're really juiced and excited, because we now have something tangible that we can help this family work towards. And we know that it's going to be a joyful time in their life, assuming that what they had on their horizon doesn't change between now and then.
Yeah, it's that ever present change that that
Right.
we have to adapt to. Um, so getting to something that's clearly close to my profession and one of my passions. Where does credit fit into this conversation? Because it's one of those things that, from my experience, it can be a fantastic tool, or it can be not so good. So people can get into trouble. How do we incorporate credit into that discussion, and how you use it, and when it's appropriate?
Yeah. So I think, to your point, I think credit is a fantastic tool. I don't think it's never a good tool. I think we just aren't prepared as people sometimes to use this fantastic tool in the right way. And some of that is due to lack of knowledge, some of it's due to lack of education, and some of it's just simply due to uh, experiencing other people using it poorly and us absorbing and learning it, in our earlier years. So I think credit is a fantastic tool, important, and I would say that in many of families' goals, there are goals that are going to align themselves to credit, right, and being able to put yourself in a good position. The simplest is if you own a car or you own an RV that you want to go away for 5 months and travel, there's going to be insurance. And one component of that cost of insurance for you and your family is your credit score. That is one component of it. So having a good credit score is helpful, just even on a lower level like that. Then you start moving up to bigger decisions, like if you want to have a home for you and your family to live in, or you to live in, whatever the family structure is, and you're not going to buy it cash, credit's going to come in very handy. There are a lot of perks with utilizing credit properly, such as points with credit cards, etc. So I think that the important thing is, at a very early age, people should start educating themselves on credit and understanding how to use it and use it properly. And I don't believe it's bad. I believe it's a great tool. We just have to educate ourselves on how to use it properly. And it could ultimately mean the difference between hundreds of dollars or even hundreds of thousands of dollars in cash flow outlay, from having a great credit score to having a poor credit score. And those are really just two extremes, right? The insurance, example and the home example. And there are a ton in between, right? Little purchases like maybe smaller purchases like a car, or even just getting a credit card, and if you have to maintain a balance, or being able to get one of those buy now pay later opportunities based upon credit. I never say you don't want to carry the balance past the pay later date, but it
Right.
might give you. I've used it personally, bought furniture and not had to pay it for 24 months, zero interest.
Yeah.
Day before the 24 months is up, I pay it in full just to get the float on the money. So credit is a great tool, and I would encourage anybody and everybody, if you don't know how to use it properly, learn. And if you haven't even thought about it, start learning about it as early as possible, because it's a great tool that, if used properly, can be extremely helpful and cost saving over the long haul.
Yeah, and that's what I kind of the analogy is it's like any tool. It's like a hammer in the toolbox. If you use it properly, you could build great things. If you don't, you could break your hand. So don't hit your thumb with it. So it's
Right.
it's think about how you use credit. And how you use it to your advantage. You think about buying a car. One of my stories, the last time I bought a vehicle, when a dealership planned to pay cash for it, had saved up for years and years and was ready to buy the car. And they said, "Well, you want to finance it?" I said, "No, I want to pay cash." And they said, "Well, if you finance for us, we can take another $3,000 off the price of the car." I went, "So is there?" My next question was, "Well, if I finance, is there an early payoff
Hmm.
penalty?" And they said, "No." I said, "Then I'll finance." And as soon as I got the finance papers, I paid it off and saved me another $3,000 on the vehicle.
There you
So
go.
it's credit is not debt, and that's the thing I always try to stress too. Is credit's a financial debt's the problem. We just have to figure out how to avoid it, because if we don't take on debt and we use it well, it can help us with our future. So I think that's. But if you don't, it can make that future a lot less joyful, especially when the
Great.
bill comes in the end of the month.
Yes.
Um, so how do we? How do you suggest people start sort of that money conversation? If we want to talk about, do we start out with, let's have a money talk today, or do you start somewhere else? Do you start with, what do we want? What am I trying to do? What's my why? What are the questions you should ask yourself before you or when do you bring money into that conversation?
Yeah, I think money is the tail end of the conversation and discussion. And if you're a single individual, obviously you can have this kind of thought process with yourself. If you're a couple, I think it's vitally important that you each express kind of what your own why is, what your own goals are. And it's okay. Not everything has to align 100%. You can each have your own individual whys. You can have your own individual goals. And you can also have a why as a couple, and bring some of those together and keep some of those separate in terms of the why and the goals. So I think it's vitally important to have that on the table first and have a really distinct understanding of where everybody stands and what their why is. Because when you start venturing into the money conversations, it's going to help you steer or understand and navigate that part of the conversation. Because if you're on one side of the couple and you have a propensity to save a lot of money, and maybe you're oversaver, right, which is a thing, and maybe your significant other is more of a spender. But if you know that from your whys and from your goals, maybe then you as a couple need to understand that there should be a happy medium between the two, and you guys regulate each other. You regulate each other. Maybe both of you are spenders. Now that's more problematic, because then you have to figure out a way. Are we truly spending because this is bringing us a tremendous amount of joy, or are we just spending for the sake of spending? So I think the money conversation has to come after. And then once you have that in place and have the money conversation, then it's important to put that budget together, put that plan together, evaluate your holistic situation. And it's not all about, I don't want people to get the misperception that what I'm saying is spend in the here and now and enjoy life to the fullest and forget about tomorrow. And that's not what we're saying. What we're saying is there's got to be a happy medium between putting that plan together, saving for your future, whatever that looks like for you and your significant other, and whatever brings you joy, but also enjoying today and in the moment. There's got to be some joy today. You can't just say, I'm going to defer all my excess money into my retirement account that I may not be able to use for the next 40 years, and not have any enjoyment today. Life is meant to be lived. And one of the stories I tell is my mom passed away at the age of 47, right? Her and my dad was a New York City school teacher. They were very good at saving money for retirement. They were also good at enjoying life, but at the same time, right, if they took the stance of just putting everything towards retirement, one day retiring and then enjoying, like I hear a lot of people talk about, where would that have put them? My mom didn't even have the opportunity she wouldn't have had the opportunity to live and enjoy that part of the life. So there's got to be a happy medium between the two, where we are cognizant of what our goals are and what the money is going to be needed to fulfill those goals and live that life later on. But at the same time, there has to be some enjoyment derived today as well.
So experience joy along the way, not just hope to save it up in some sort of joy account that you get to access at some distant future.
Yeah,
And
you may or may not be able to access that.
yeah,
If you're unlucky like my mom, or and it may not mean that you're not here. It could mean that maybe physically you're not able to, right? Or health declines. It could be a number of different reasons. So there's got to be some enjoyment along the way, the joy journey.
the things that we want to do. I know I read some of your bio, and you're a hockey player. I'm a hockey fan. I'm not a player. I don't know that I could do that. And I live in the South, so not a whole lot of time on skates. But I play golf, and I have a sore elbow. Who knew at my age? I've never thought I would have a sore elbow. What is
Yeah,
that about? So you get older, weird things happen.
they
It's
do.
like hit millions of golf balls in my lifetime, probably. And why is my elbow hurting now? Oh, I have gray hair on my face. That's why. Where does that come from? So I guess thinking about where do we go from here? How do people reach you, or how do we find the right advisor? What do we look for, and what like do you have some final tips around how you? Well, let me back up before we get to the final tips. One other thought, because you mentioned couples talking. How does an advisor like you, and this may be the hardest question of the day, how do you work with couples, especially if those couples are in disagreement? Do you get to or have to be um, sort of a therapist at times too, or how do you as an advisor approach working with a couple and helping them find that shared why?
Yeah, I think what you have to do is really make sure that both of them are being heard. And I don't when I'm very intentional. I'm not saying that you have to listen to both of them, right? Because it's easy to listen to two people, but it's more difficult to actually hear and be heard, right? So you want to make sure that both people are being heard. And it may just be an education process. There may be some level of education for one or both of them. I don't like calling it therapy because I'm not a licensed therapist, but there are this is a burgeoning area of our profession because there are financial therapists out there that are extremely helpful, and if needed, we can bring them into the fold. But it's really an education process, and hearing them and having them be heard and making sure that we're having open dialogue. They have open dialogue. We're not there to make any decisions or judgments. We're just there to help them understand what the potential options are, what potentially would put them in a better or worse place, and make sure that if that's still not enough, then we can always bring in one of those financial therapists. But one of the tools that we have at the firm is, and it's a free download where they can find it at mitland.us/couplesjoy. And it's basically a short document that talks about things to think about as a couple that will allow you and hopefully help you lead to a more joyful life. So that's at mitland.us/couplesjoy. It's a free download for anybody who goes there.
Awesome. Well, that's a good lead into just, I guess my final question is, do you have any other tips, final tips for people around finding joy in finance and money? Where do they find you? And how do we learn more?
Yeah. So thank you for that. And I appreciate the opportunity to share that. So I would say this, right? This is something that can be done on your own. You could do it as a couple. If you want to, you could try to go down the path and see if you're able to. A lot of the families we work with, quite frankly, they just don't have the time, effort, and energy to do it on their own because they're concerned about their careers, they're concerned about their kids, their life is busy. So they hire us, we help them navigate a lot of these pressing questions. So it can be done by yourself, but if not, seek out a fiduciary financial advisor, somebody who is going to listen and act in your best interest and is being compensated for their time, effort, and energy, and not for selling products per se. And in terms of finding us, I would direct people to our Joy Journal because this will help people kind of figure out what is most important to them, what brings them the most joy, which is found at mitland.us/joy journal. And it's a free download into a PDF. If you want a hard copy, it is available on Amazon. But again, if you want the free version, a PDF is sufficient. And you could sit down between that and the couples joy article. It'll be very helpful for you to start that journey. And through each of those is a link to all of our information, the information for Midland Financial and how to contact me. But I think those are two resources that'll be really helpful to get your listeners moving in the right direction and on the right path to a joyful life.
Fantastic, Larry. Thank you so much, and thank you for the wonderful conversation and talking about joy and it being entering the holidays right now as we speak. I think it's a perfect time to talk about how we find joy and manage money better as we go into the season and get tempted to spend money on all sorts of things. But uh, join us also on Credit Chat every Wednesday, 2 o'clock Central, 3 Eastern. Larry, hope you're still able to join us and be part of our panel when you can. And thank you for being part of Credit Chat Live today.
Thank you, Rod, and thank you to Credit Chat. It's a pleasure to be part of the community. Appreciate it.